I think you ought to know. That Men's Radio. The place where men and women really speak. Oh man, what a show. It's Men's Radio. This crazy show is on 3 times a week. Now Russ and Phil are there to help with all your cares. We laugh, we cry, we talk like grown-ups do. But if you're sad and low, it won't cost you no dough. Men's Radio, that's the place for you. With Russ Kane and Phil Dave.
Ahoy, hoy! Yeah. That's my new greeting.
Well, I don't think it's that new. I'm fairly sure it was coined a little while ago.
When was it coined, young Phil Dave? You're started for 10 no confirming he died. Bamba Gad. We love Bamba. He died.
I know. Not great,
Paul Andrews,
to say the least.
Hump Day, Paul Claridge. Well, yeah. Robert Van Buren, live from Stockholm. Hi, Russ and Phil. Hi, Robert and Paul Claridge. Good afternoon from sunny Croydon. Jeez. Oh, we could only dream of such a magnificent holiday. Croydon. Oh, Lord. Got a very, very interesting guest. I've been trying to get this guest for absolutely ages. Hello, Sue Sleet up in
By the way.
What's going on?
Hello.
Oh, hello. Yeah,
you said when was Ahoy Ahoy first used?
Yeah,
it was to do with the.
You've been looking it up.
No. Excuse me. It was to do with the invention of the telephone. No,
correctamundo.
So that would have been the 1870s, wasn't that the first?
Yeah, there were two people, Alexander Graham Bell and Edison, right? Both inventing the telephone. And one of them, and I can't remember for the life of me which one it is, wanted the greeting when you picked up the phone to be ahoy hoy, which was a kind of naval term. And the other person came up with the crazy idea of just going, hello. And seriously, I'm not making it up. And so oddly enough, hello became the way, as opposed to ahoy hoy every time the phone rang. Good day from New York. A's Don Brown. Ding. And this is a good one. Here we go. Boy, my computer is.
Oh dear. Terribly sorry.
But it's a non-refundable.
We appear to be going a bit robotic today. Oh dear. Well, there we go, ladies and gentlemen. By the wonders of modern technology, Russ has just dropped off. I'm so sorry. And I don't mean fallen asleep, but it's probably for the best, really. Never mind. Paul Andrews says, come here. I've got something to show you. First telephone call I seem to recall. I don't get it. What do you mean? What, someone phoned you to say that the first time they phoned you? Oh, I don't know. Someone by the name of Linda Dave says, afternoon, gentlemen. Well, hate to tell you, not gentlemen at the plural anymore. Ross clearly forgot to pay his bill again. Anyway, luckily waiting in the wings to salvage this wreck of a program before it's even got off the ground is Lizzie Pickering. Now, Lizzie, a very warm welcome to Men's Radio. Don't worry, Russ will rejoin us as soon as he has put another 50 pence in the meter. But just in case those watching don't know who you are, what you do, or where you're from, care to enlighten us, sort of, Lizzie Pickering, what it is that you do?
Hi, I'm a filmmaker and a podcast producer, but I also do grief guidance for people. I went through grief myself when my eldest son Harry died 21 years ago. And I've just written a book called When Grief Equals Love. And Russ is one of the interviewees in my book. It's a book. It's a grief memoir of my experience of grief. But then I've interviewed 23 other people with long-term perspectives of grief over the years and advice for people over the things that have helped and the things that haven't helped.
I want to know straight away, with your expert opinion, why you think grief is something that so many people are scared of or they run from and they never confront it face on. I was thinking it sort of seems to be that there are those who, well, I suppose they're more in denial more than anything, but just don't want to tackle it. Why do you think that is?
I think there are real cultural issues, and I think we're very bad at grief in England. And I specifically say England because in Ireland, they're so much better at it. In Ireland, you have the wake, and every child in Ireland will have seen a dead body because, you know, when somebody dies, they're kept in the house for a while and all the friends and family come and visit. In Mexico, you have the Day of the Dead, where grieving people welcome back their dead every year with food and drink and stories. And yet in England, we are not good at it. We hide it away. And I think part of that is still the remnants of the Second World War, where people who went to war were told, don't mention the war, don't talk about anything that you've witnessed or seen or heard or experienced. And the people they loved, who they came back to, where they came back to them, were told, don't ask any questions. And, you know, we're not really that many decades on from that war. And certainly, you know, I'm 56, and I think, you know, my parents who were young during the war, and then my grandparents who I was very close to my grandmother, none of them ever spoke about it. And I think culturally there's still that silence, and you know, we're trying to break those barriers down at the moment. And that's partly why I included interviews with other people in my book, because in my grief guidance work, I talk to so many people and I hear about the silence. You know, they say, I wanted to go back to work after my major bereavement, but I was met with silence. People didn't ask me about it. And so I think culturally we're very scared to talk about it. We don't want to hear about it because we know we're all going to face it.
Well, I think we're also bred to believe that, and this is hopefully what programs such as Men's Radio, Women's Radio, and hopefully others are trying to break down, is this thought of sharing or even just showing emotion is just so uncouth, and one wouldn't dare to shed a tear in public or anything like that. And I have to confess, I'm not great at it. I don't get terribly emotional because of the way that I've been, as it were, I suppose, sort of brought up in a very traditional way to believe that one doesn't show emotion publicly. It's not the right thing to do. So actually, I suppose it must stem really from all of that.
Yeah, I think that's right. You know, it depends on the household you're brought up in. And I've been able to actually learn a lot from my own children's reactions to grief, you know, and we've had a very open conversation ongoing for the last 21 years. And it often includes, you know, talk about their brother, who's very much still part of this family. So, oh, there's Russ. Hi, Russ.
Right, how nice of you to pop in. Still looks a bit robotic, but we'll work with what we've got here and see what happens.
I don't know the system. Can you hear me all right or not? Because the system, for some reason, it's taken me all this time to reboot, which is just extraordinary.
Oh dear. Oh well, we'll find out. We'll persevere, see what happens. Well, I can't say it's better, but I'm going to have. We'll carry. Oh, he's gone again. Right, there you go. Easy come, easy go. It was nice of him to drop in. It's what you call a fly-in visit, I'm afraid, Lizzie. But what can you do? Anyway, well, I mean, that's how desperate he was to get you on this program, you see, that he couldn't even be bothered to turn up for it. But there you go. I'm sure he'll be
I'm not insulted.
As soon as he gets his system sorted, I've no doubt.
I've got him in print in my book. I've captured him. So he can't get away from that.
You know, Russ is actually I feel that Russ is quite open about these things, and yet he's quite closed off about it as well. You can always see that when a subject is brought up that means something to him, whether it be obviously when he lost his wife to cancer, which was not really a hidden secret, people do know about that, whether it be when his father passed, or more recently losing his mother as well, any of the conditions associated with the people that he has lost, you can sort of see the pain behind the eyes, but again, doesn't necessarily publicly display the emotion that clearly is going on inside. But as far as your experience is concerned, you seem to speak so, and I don't want to come across as patronizing, I'm just saying it how I see it. You seem to be able to speak so bravely and so calmly about what must have been one of the most hideous things anyone could ever go through.
It was, I mean, yes, it was. It was horrendous, and I wouldn't miss it on anybody. But I suppose, as with all these things, you have choice taken away. There was no choice in the death of my son, and with he had a neuromuscular condition, and he had quite a severe version of it. All our children had a 1 in 4 chance of having it. It was caused by a deleted gene in my husband and I, so it's not something that was in the family before. So there was a lot of shock involved in the diagnosis, and then living with the knowledge that that our son was very ill and becoming full-time carers. But I think for us, there was an element of just wanting to make the most of every single day with him. And then that carried on. And when he died, age 6.5, which was November 2000, that sense of, and I see it in my grief clients now, that in a way, people say to me, isn't it depressing talking to people about grief every day? I do a lot of one-to-one work, and I work with companies helping people back to work and educating about grief in companies with talks. And to me, it's the greatest privilege, because you never, ever see more courage than in people who are bereaved, and especially those who are recently bereaved and in those early stages of shock. And it's such a privilege to be alongside them. And I learn from each and every one of them. And so I see that same, once you get through the initial shock, there's a sense of wanting to find a way forward and to live with the grief. I don't believe in closure with grief. Most people who are bereaved are confused at the beginning, because you hear about closure all the time and that leaving things behind. But actually, the truth is, most people don't want to leave the memories behind. They want to find a healthy way forward of living with them, because time does not heal with grief. When you've had a major bereavement, as Russ has said in his interview with me in the book, time does not heal. But we learn to live with it and hopefully make the most of every single day, and it's so for me, the grief guidance is helping people to find that way forward. And I think it's by sharing stories and sharing experiences that we can give people the courage to start moving forward. And
I worry though that these expressions such as closure, or is saying expressions such as time is a great healer and what have you, all of these things are masquerade. I think they are designed to sort of, if you like, imaginary tools to help us forget that we've yet to deal with something. Absolutely.
And I think, when people give you these platitudes, as I know, Russ and I have talked quite a lot about it, people want you to be better. There's a misunderstanding there, but also they genuinely care about you and they want you to be the old you again. I think it's just as stressful for people around you. No.
First of all, it's never going to happen. Second, I hope you can hear me. I'm sorry, I don't know what it is. The system here has just gone mad this morning, so I apologize for that.
He's annoyed British Telecom for the last time.
It's not. No. It's not just that. It was the actual computer system is really malfunctioning at the moment. So my apologies to you, Lizzie, and to everybody all over the world. Number one, when you're not
messages out, Russell, I've been waiting for you to read messages. So.
Oh, okay. So sleep. When my dad died, my mum became very angry. Well, anger is one of the stages you go through, trust me. If I showed her my distress, oh, Lord. So I was still in deep grief when I returned to work and couldn't cope when offered condolences. Yeah, I get that, Sue. Elizabeth Green, my mother told me to think of it. He's gone shopping. Only your mother, Elizabeth. Only your mother could come up with crap like that. Asa, thank you. Welcome back. Elizabeth Green, yeah, when my father died, I was 15. The body was in a coffin in the house overnight. That's a bit weird. And I did not go to the burial. Ooh, Okay.
Elizabeth, actually, in all seriousness, think about that. Just when you get a moment to reply, please do. Has that stayed with you? Has that scarred you at all? Because I'd imagine that would have a deeply troubling effect on someone as young as 15 to know that.
Well,
I'd be very interested to know if you are.
somebody called Linda Dave. I lost my mum 20 years ago. The way I dealt with it was I went to a medium. Okay. He told me about 15 things about my life with my parents. Had never met me before. Everything he said was bang on right. I think you got to, I think, Lizzie, you probably agree there is no formula for doing this. When I went to a grief counselor, the only smart thing they said to me, and I found it useless, to be honest with you, was when it comes to grieving, one day's too short and a lifetime's too long. That was it. That was the only thing that I could glean from several sessions with a grief counselor, because I thought it was a total waste of time, but that was just me.
Gracious.
No, I think it's a good point, Russ, because, and this is, I mean, there are very, very good therapists and counselors, but I'm specifically not a therapist or a counselor. I've developed my grief guidance through lived experience and through talking to so many other bereaved parents in the children's hospice world and bereaved people generally. And I think I've just I've gleaned bereavement from, like a magpie. I've picked up, we all learn from each other. And that's what my book is about, really. It's all the things that help and the things that haven't helped. And then people can sort of form their own grief toolkit. My grief guidance is very practical. And it's finding out, from everybody who they are, what are the things, do they love reading? Do they find it easier to listen to things? Do they, and then helping them to piece together really practical ways forward. Because not everybody wants to unpick their whole lives because they've had a bereavement. They want to learn how to survive grief healthily.
Yeah.
And how to live.
I mean, I've talked about this openly because if death is going to have any meaning, you've got to use it to help the living. It's just how I feel about it. So I've been, open about it, but I don't want to be. I mean, the one thing I have tried to avoid, and I'm very serious, I do not want to be like the Yoko Ono of broadcasting. It's just a professional widow. That drives me around the bend. I can't bear that. We'll come on to the comments in a minute. I knew you'd get a lot of comments, Lizzie, and these are fantastic. The word anger has been used. I harnessed anger. I'm still angry all these years later. And I use that anger as an energy. I use it, there's a Public Image song, anger is an energy. And I think anger can either destroy you or it can propel you forward. And I've always, anyone who knows me personally knows that when I make up my mind to do something, I do it. And I use that anger.
When you say anger, who or what is it aimed at?
Well, that's exactly the point. That is a brilliant point. And Lizzie, jump in whenever you want. Who do you blame? Who do you blame? And I'm not talking about, God forbid, your mum gets knocked down by a drunk driver. Obviously, you're going to blame the idiot behind the wheel. I get that. When somebody dies of natural causes, cancer, heart attack, whatever, who are you going to be angry with? Well, the world, really, or if you believe in such a thing, God, or whoever. So you've got this anger, but you can't position it. You can't aim it at anything specific, and that's even worse. So you have this general anger that you've got to try and deal with. And Phil's question's an excellent one, is who are you angry with? Well, bloody everybody, everything, You've got to be very, very careful.
Russ, going back to the practical ways forward, because there is nowhere really for that anger to go. It's about finding how to diffuse it, really, isn't it? And to put it into a more positive sense. And I know, with some of my interviews, I interviewed my friend Francie Clarkson, whose father died when she was very young, and then her sister died. And for her, exercise and fundraising through marathons, Ironmans, things like that, something she'd never done before, has been her lifeline, because that exercise can be a way of diffusing anger, can't it? And for me, it was yoga and meditation, and going back to the breath. And so often with my grief clients, when they're in the very early stages of grief, that anger is stopping them breathing properly. And there's such an irony to me that when somebody dies, we stop breathing properly. The bereaved stop breathing properly. It's such a big issue. And I see it time and time again.
I'm really sorry to interrupt, but how do we know we've stopped breathing? Is that something that someone will be consciously aware of? It's just subconscious, and how can they look out for it?
Well, so in my case, it was actually 16 years after my son died. I'd always tried different things, you know, from physio. There are so many physical aspects of grief that, you know, it's really a lifelong journey to sort of find the things that work for you. And yoga was working very well for me. But I found that when I had to do a deep breath in, I couldn't fill my lungs properly. And I thought it was because after my son died, for about 4 years, I'd get pneumonia every year. And now I know that that was a very physical aspect of grief. And I wasn't breathing properly, which wasn't helping the pneumonia. It was a real catch-22. And 16 years on, I went to a cranial sacrotherapist, a physical form of therapy. And she said she would manage to sort of release my lungs through a mixture of talking and hands-on approach. And I've been able to fill my lungs properly ever since.
I'm so sorry, but did you just say you got pneumonia? This has only just sunk in. You got pneumonia 4 years in succession.
Yeah, every year.
I got it once, and that was bad enough. I don't know how.
I got double pneumonia. It was bloody awful, Lizzie. I was absolutely laid me waste. The thing is,
you know, Russ, the number of people I speak to who have lung issues and gut problems, you know, a gut reaction, not breathing properly because of holding your breath with tension through grief, lump in the throat. You know, we have these going mad with grief. So many clients say they've got brain fog when they're in early bereavement or for 1 or 2 years afterwards, and they think they're literally going mad. And we have that expression, going mad with grief. And once you know, I'm able to say to them, these are very normal symptoms of grief. Let's see what we can do about them. And we chip away at them and see how to cope with them. And then it normalizes it. And the way it changes people's perspective, because you put all those elements together and it's very frightening.
And please get me to read these messages, because there are some people who are being very open and honest here, and I don't want to think we're ignoring them. Elizabeth Green has gone on to say that it took her 17 years to realise that her father wasn't coming back to her. Paul Andrews has said that when his mother died, his father was very pragmatic, open and honest about his feelings. And when he died, he said that he followed the same mindset. To some, he, as in Paul's father and Paul himself, appeared to not be dealing with it, but it's just the way that he says that they are. Practical, pragmatic, and positive. He says that he still chats to them every day, but rarely finds the need to shed a tear. Everyone is different. Fascinating.
Luke Newman says, I lost my mum when she was 54. It's nothing. And my sister at 44. Oh, Luke, I am sorry. Although I miss them terribly, in their honor, I spread the importance of men talking about how they are feeling, especially grief. Yeah, you can turn it to something good, or you can just wallow in it. It's kind of your choice. It really is your choice. Listen to this one. This is from Elizabeth Green, who's watching in New York. She's in Manhattan. I was in Texas with people I didn't even know. And it hit me, started to cry and cry and cry. And that's something I'd like to talk to you about. There's loads more messages coming in. But sometimes the thing about grief, and I think you and I discussed this, is that there's no statute of limitations on it. You know, there's no point saying don't beat yourself up and say, well, it was 10 years ago and I should be fit. It is what it is. And there is no instruction manual about this. It takes as long as it takes. It never really goes away. You just deal with it, and you have to learn to deal with it. But sometimes things can just catch you completely out of nowhere, and that's okay. You're not going mad. You're not going round the bend. You're not weak, and you're not stupid. You know, I can be minding my own business, thinking about anything, and then suddenly, boom! It just smacks you in the face like a baseball bat. And you go, okay, and then you process that, and then you move on. But please,
It's
please,
so
please
true,
don't
Russ.
say you're weak. You're not going round the
No.
bend. You're not a pathetic person. You're just dealing with something which
Also,
you just have to deal with.
Russ, I think, it's so important that we release the stress from our bodies. And sometimes having a cry or even just, a moment is a great stress buster. And, one of the reasons so many people who bottle it up and cannot speak about it for whatever reason for years and years, eventually that will come out, whether it be panic attacks or heart issues, gut issues. If you hold it in, it's a really bad thing for your body. And so actually, people are often worried. I hear people who are around bereaved people saying, well, we're worried we made them cry, because they might be talking and the person will start to cry. I try and encourage people to see tears as one of the most positive stress releases, because, if you've brought up the name of the person that has died in conversation and that person cries, see it as a positive thing. You have enabled them to talk and release some of that stress from their body in the form of tears. And that's an absolute gift. It really is. So nobody should ever be fearful of being around somebody who has a cry. You've let them off the hook for a while
This
from
is
their
such
own
important.
thoughts.
It's such important stuff. Look at
That's it.
this. Now, this is from Scotland. My nan died from cancer 64 years ago. I had bronchitis for 7 years afterwards. Never realized it was part of grief. Thank you for sharing your knowledge, Lizzie. That's from Sue
Wow.
Sweet.
Can we read? There's a message here from Paul Claridge, and it's quite long-winded, so bear with. But I do
long
want
rather than long-winded. It's long. It's lengthy. Are you going to read it out? It's an important one, isn't it?
The problem is that I've just lost it. So
I've got it. When my youngest son, this is from Paul.
No, I know, but that's unfortunately chopped off at the end, which is why I was actually going to try and find it through Facebook. So, but
right. When my youngest son, well, we'll start with part one, then we go to an ad break. When my youngest son Christopher was stillborn in 2004, oh, Paul, Jesus, there was a lot of help available through the NHS for my wife, but nothing for me or other men or the siblings of the deceased. Wow, you see, so true. Thank goodness for SANDS, that's SANDS, the Stillbirth and Neonatal Death Charity. They were great and understood what I was going through. Conversely, I've also found a few other friends who've had experience stillbirth or loss of a baby have been great too. And likewise, I know what they felt like and how grief never, and we never know what happened after.
No, we do. And how grief never really goes away totally. Grief is different for all of us, he goes on to say.
Now, here's a question for you, Lizzie Pickering. This is from Elizabeth Green over in Manhattan. And she says, I always worried that if I started to cry, I wouldn't be able to stop. Good point. What do you think?
Yeah, that's such a hard one, isn't it? And, again, where people have panic attacks, sometimes it's trying to keep the tears in. I went through that in the first 3 years after my son died. I would be in supermarkets waiting to pay. And it was that knowledge that I couldn't cry when I was in the queue, but at the time I was crying every other moment of the day.
Yeah, of course.
And trying to hold those tears in. Sometimes I would actually take the shopping trolley and just say to the assistant, I'm so sorry, I can't pay for this. And I'd leave because I couldn't do it. And I had to find ways around that by actually going with a friend and, finding practical ways of doing the shopping so that I couldn't do that. But it's a really tough one. And I think one of the answers is, going back to the breathing, helping yourself. A client just yesterday who's in the very early throes of grief, on the call, he was crying so much that I stopped for a while and I just said to him, breathe in deeply for the count of 6 and hold your breath for a few moments and then breathe out very, very slowly. And we did that 3 times. And until it wasn't that I didn't want the tears to come, it was so healthy that they were coming. But sometimes you're in a situation where they get too much. And I could see he wasn't coping well with that. And I think going back to the breath is a really, really good way of coping when you feel that awful grief rising that you feel out of. It's about control, isn't it? It's, you know, I would go and I'd put my young children to bed, and then I would go and cry and cry and cry in a different room on my own. But I'd kept that in most of the day, you know, trying to be a good parent to my children.
Been on that little journey. That was fun.
I bet you have, Ross.
Yeah, it was shit. Azadon Brown, he's in New York State, not in New York State. We always stress that. I love the fact this is an international show. For me, I've had many losses, but losing my child, oh God, Asa, left a mark upon my life. I would say I got 4 kids, and God forbid, a million times, anything happened to them, I'd be done. That I know I would never recover from. And how people... No, Phil, let me finish.
Forgive me for saying, but Lizzie, I'm sure you would have said the same thing before it happened to you.
I think it's any of these things that are unimaginable.
I couldn't, no, it'd be finished at the end for me. I couldn't do it.
I thought the same, Ross. And, you know, I've this is why I've written the book, really, because it's funny, when I first wrote the book, I called it A Grief Endured, but I finished it 21 years on from starting writing it, and I've called it When Grief Equals Love. Because
it's a much better title. Am I allowed to say that?
It is,
because it's more positive, you know.
But it's also taken me all those years to realize that, and to really realize it and feel it fully. Whereas before I didn't feel that. It was endurance, and that's why the book is a 21-year perspective. I think there are a lot of grief books that are in the early throes of grief. And it was actually the publishers that helped me see that this was a long-term perspective, and that's what sets it apart slightly. And that's why I also didn't want it just to be my story. I wanted it to be the story of others. So it starts with my grief diaries in the 7 years after Harry died. I wanted to observe my children's grief, and going back to that earlier comment from somebody about siblings, I think it is so important to talk about siblings and the grief they go through. And the first people I interviewed for my book were my own children, my surviving children, because they were 2 and 5 when their brother died. And it was why I started writing, because I wanted to record their grief for them, because I knew they might not remember. And it was only for them. I never meant to publish it. But 21 years on, I interviewed them as adults about how their brother's death has affected them. And actually, you know, this isn't a depressing book, because nearly everybody I interviewed has had some silver linings through their grief. And it really, and how it's, my daughter, who's 23, Emily, said it's made her a better friend to people, because she's not scared to go in and help people and have those difficult conversations with them when something goes wrong. And my son, the same, you know, it's made him much more aware of time passing and how he wants to use his time. And I think there's so much in all these interviews, including yours, Russ, about the long-term perspective and how we can help others through what we've learned.
This is a huge... Let me dive in here, Phil. Phil, let me dive in. This is like, we could talk about this for 3 hours, but this is the important thing is this: when somebody passes, no, I can't say passes. That's just ducking. When somebody dies, you have to concentrate on the funeral, and this is for everybody. Everyone's there, everyone's around you, and the family's around you, and everybody's there, right? And then you have the funeral, and then everybody buggers off. And suddenly you're left. So when the process, if it's a sudden death, okay, I'm being very honest about this, but if it's a long death, you know, cancer, whatever it is, you're concentrating, you're going to the hospital, you know, you're very, very busy. You're dealing with that. Then you've got the funeral, which is a big, big thing. And then suddenly you're alone. And then the grief, and then all you've got is this time to start thinking, and it's horrible, because it's like falling off the edge of a cliff. So the fact, Lizzie, that it's you're taking a long-term view is so important, because the short term, you'll have friends or family, there'll be people around you, be supported. I mean, that's just how it kind of mostly human nature is. But it's the afterwards and the aftermath, and that is tough. That
It is. And,
is tough.
I think for me personally, I would say my early traumatic grief was the first 3 years. And then there was quite a shift, and then, but the trouble is that people really seem to think in our culture that you might get to a year and that you've been through all those first hurdles and that you might be getting better, our favorite word. But it doesn't work like that. And it's messy, isn't it? It's different for everybody. You have setbacks. You sometimes feel much better. And on those days, you might feel guilty because you're feeling all right. You're actually feeling quite happy for a few hours.
Well, this is another huge issue. Do you feel, I moved on with my life. I was blessed. And for reasons I'm not going to discuss, it's not for public consumption. I was blessed and I moved on with my life. Do I feel guilty about that? Well, what the choice is, you can either lay in the gutter and be a crying wreck, or you can get on with your life. And if you've got children, young children especially, your duty is to look after them. And that's what it was. And when people say, "Oh, you were so brave," I look at them like they're raving mad. I mean, I don't think there was a choice. It's not being brave, it's being practical. You've got little kids, they're 5 years old, little twins of 5. What the hell are you going to do? You got to put them first. That's what a grown-up does. And I just thought, right, they come first and I'll deal with myself second. And that's an ongoing process.
And I think
you can't feel guilty about. You can't. And the other thing is, I'd love to discuss with you. It's no good feeling guilty, because if somebody loved you, I'm not talking about children. It's so emotional. I can't even talk. I can't even go there. But if you lose your partner or whatever, would they have wanted you, if they truly loved you, would they have wanted you to be miserable for the rest of your life? I mean, what kind of logic is that?
No, it's true. Yes. It's absolutely true, Russ.
Elizabeth Green in New York City says, "Truthfully, I feel as if I want to cry every day. And my life's okay mostly. I have food and a roof. What you do?" And she says her children are a gift. And this is about kids. It's the wrong order for a child to die before their parent. Isn't that the truth? When my first husband died, his mother was still alive, and it really affected her mentally, and she ended up with dementia. Yes, it's tough. It's tough. There is, it's a very complicated issue. It's a very,
it's so complicated, and it's such an enormous subject. And it's where so often I end up with my clients just going back to starting to breathe properly. And it's these tiny steps that you make, isn't it? Going back to the person who just said, "I want to cry every day." Absolutely. And you will cry every day, but it's finding this balance, I think, isn't it, of getting rid of the tears, getting them out of your body is very healthy, and then breathing properly and trying to look after yourself as well as you can, mixing that with trying to keep your relationships going. And it's just finding this balance in increments, really, but they're very small at the beginning, aren't they? And then gradually you find that those sort of waves of grief that at the beginning are like a tsunami, gradually those waves just get slightly further apart, and are slightly less violent, and things calm. It's not that anything's changed, really. It's just that your body, your whole body and your mind are gradually adapting to living with the loss. And that's what happens. You don't get better. You adapt around the grief, don't you?
Phil, I interrupted you, and you were about to ask a question.
When you spoke to your I beg your pardon, when you spoke to your children, as adults, did you notice any parallels between the way that they dealt with their grief?
And parallels with each other?
Yes, and exactly. In the terms of the way that they do, just because I'm interested to sort of know whether or not this whole nature-nurture argument comes into play here. Because the fact that obviously they were brought up in the same household, they went through it all at the same time, but I'm curious to know whether or not they dealt with it sort of in their own individual ways, or actually there were parallels between the way they dealt with.
That's such a brilliant question again, because no, they dealt with it very, very differently. And I think they illustrated what I see with so many grief clients, which is your grief. So many people grieve differently in a family because their relationship, each relationship with the person who's died is going to be a different relationship and a different dynamic, forming the whole of a family with the family dynamic. And so I know they won't mind me saying, because they've said it in the book, but my children, my daughter Emily was only 2, so she suffered a lot when she was 8 from feeling that she didn't have the same memories. She had a sort of jealousy and envy of the rest of us because she saw photos everywhere around the house of well, there's one right here on my desk. Can you see that?
Oh, look.
You know, this is Harry here, and Emily and Cam, and that's not long before he died. And you know, you can see their relationship. So Emily could see all these photos of her relationship with Harry. There's her sitting on his lap, there's him feeding her as a baby, but she doesn't remember them. And so, you know, she struggled with that when she was 8 and he died when she was 2. Cam, my son, and Harry were inseparable. They were only 17 months apart. And Cam, in my grief diaries, on one day he said, we were twins, weren't we? Which they weren't actually, but he felt they were. And he said, this is age 5. He said, I feel like I've been cut in half. That's how he described it, age 5. And, you know, that's why I wanted to record all these things, because Emily, when she could talk, she used to wake up every day and say, where's Harry? Every morning. And I looked in my diaries where I recorded it, and she did that for 6 months after he died.
What did you say? What did you say?
I actually say, and I had very good guidance from Helen House, the children's hospice where he died, and where they helped us to talk to the siblings. I said, no, Emily, Harry's died. And
you use those words? You use those words?
Yeah, I didn't. Okay. I don't ever use lost or passed away. I always said died. And that was the advice from the children's hospice. Because obviously one of the scariest things is if the minute Harry died, they said to us, don't tell the children that he's asleep, because it's such a natural thing to do. But they've seen children over the years have terrible nightmares where their parents have said, he's asleep, because obviously they don't come back from that sleep, and that's terrifying for a child. And so they were very helpful to us with that language. And again, in the book, I've covered all of that because it's a huge thing. And I was terrified of how to talk to my children. I was terrified originally of how to talk to Harry about his own death, because, you know, we lived through him being very, very ill. And again, the hospice said to us, be led by him. I didn't know whether we should be proactive in discussing the severity of his illness with him, but they said, no, answer questions honestly, but allow him to ask them, because children under the age of 10 will lead the way on what they can absorb and what they want to know. And he did ask one of the staff at Helen House to show him lung function in a diagram. And he was only 6.5, but he had a reading age of 13 when he died, because often children who are disabled but are so lucky to have their minds, those that do have good use of their minds, you know, often the minds develop further because they're not doing all the physical things that other children do. They're observing and they're reading. But he didn't ask, am I going to die? He just asked to see how the lungs worked. And he knew that he was on medication to help that, but he didn't ask that question. And I was so grateful he didn't, because I knew how I'd got to answer it, but I feel for people who have to go there. I really do.
Absolutely.
He saved me from that one.
Using the right language is so important. I've got
Yeah.
some relatives. I'm trying to walk through this gently, whose mother died under, let's just say, tragic circumstances and leave it at that. And the father said, "Oh, she's gone on holiday." And so for years, they thought their mum, who was very dead, I can assure you, had gone on holiday. And they then had to deal with the fact she wasn't on holiday. And that was bad. I'll leave
Do you
it
know
there.
what I get from that straight out, and don't get me wrong, I've obviously never been put in that position, so how am I to judge? But I feel as though that would have led to them having to deal with the sense of abandonment initially, and then have to deal with the grief.
Phil, you've spot on, Phil. Spot on. That's exactly
And being
what happened.
lied to.
Exactly. You've been lied to. You feel stupid. You feel you've been abandoned. And then you think, oh, hang on, they're not on holiday. They're dead. Now I've got to deal with that. So, Phil, correct. Horrible. Not the way to do it. Although you think you're doing the right thing, but you're not.
It's
You're not.
protecting, isn't it? It's adults protecting children. And, you know, I was definitely in that position. And maybe you were, Russ, too, of course, when Sally was ill, that of course, we want to protect our children from this awful reality. And I always had this sense that, you know, I'd at least got to my 30s before I had to deal with something as awful as that. Whereas my young children, I was so aware they'd got to live with it for the rest of their lives, and that how we handled it was so important. And, you know, that's where we do need advice from these amazing charities with their information on grief and the help for siblings and for parents and how to talk to them. And it's just so important, isn't it? Language, as you say.
Look at this coming in from, this is from Scotland. Boy, we're hitting home today. Sue Sleet. Children under 7 believe whatever is said in concrete terms. So at 4, when my nan died, I was told she'd gone to live on a star. This is so sad. Phil, could you finish reading this? I'm so sorry. I'm struggling today. Could you?
Sue goes on to say that I always felt it was my fault, as I had gone to my aunt's. I was 10 when the reality hit. Gracious.
Oh, God damn.
It's so hard, isn't it?
Thank you, everybody, for being so very honest. I mean, you know, it's a very tough subject, but if we don't, you know, if we shy away from it, then what's the point of Men's Radio Station? And if we shy away from it, we're not doing what we set out to do, which was try to help. And I think Lizzie is an extraordinary, I mean, we've known each other for a while, but an extraordinary guest, and so eloquent and so practical.
It's practicality that's needed, isn't it? It really is. It's how do we find a way forward? And, you know, for me, having the practical suggestions from the Children's Hospice, where at the time they'd had 30 years of observing and being with bereaved parents, they had way more suggestions of practical things of how we could live well beyond Harry's death than our GP or anybody else we encountered, you know, because they've witnessed it. It was lived experience of being alongside bereaved people. And that is the most helpful thing. I'm not a counsellor or a therapist or a doctor, but I have lived with it. And like with your men's radio station and the women's radio station, if we can talk about it, we can learn from each other. I learn from every single one of my clients.
It is. I mean, why I admire you and your book and what you stand for is I cannot bear, and I'm going to call it the Californian way. You know, it's kind of hippy dippy bullshit rubbish. Let's be honest. Let's just label it for what it is. It's nonsense. It's airy fairy tosh, and it doesn't help at all because it's not practical. And although you can say, well, grief is not the same as a Hayes manual for repairing your Austin Allegro, I get it, but there are real practical things. And one of the things is to appreciate that you're not a freak and you're not weak and you're not pathetic if you're struggling. That's the first thing. And once you can say, okay, it's kind of all right. I'm not enjoying feeling like this, but it's a natural way. And the only way that I described it is at first it's like having the worst migraine. I've said this many times. I know I said it to you, Lizzie. It's like having the worst migraine and you want to smash your head against the wall because that would be less painful than the migraine. And then after whatever period it is, and it varies, that migraine goes down to like a bad headache, like a really blinding headache. And then it goes to a bad headache. And eventually over time, it's like just a distant little hum that's in your back of your head. You can deal with it every day. You can get on with your life. It's there. And occasionally that hum gets a little bit louder, but you can completely deal with life. You've got through it. That's the only way that I can really describe it. You've just got to get through somehow those early stages, which are brutal.
Yeah,
they're brutal.
And be very kind to yourself where you can be. And sometimes that is saying no to invitations. Because as you said earlier, Russ, at the beginning, you get so many people looking after you and being there for you, but they do drift away.
Oof.
And that's the hardest part. And I remember when Harry died, for years we hadn't been able to go anywhere, not even to our friends' houses. 2 friends had ramps put in their houses so that Harry's powered chair could get in, all the equipment we had. But he couldn't go on play dates, and it meant that neither could Cam or Emily as young children. And so when Harry died, there was this sort of strange period where suddenly we could go to friends' houses where they'd all been to our house. Our house was always full of people, which was wonderful. But we couldn't go anywhere else. And we couldn't go on proper holidays. We used to holiday at the Children's Hospice every summer.
Oh my
and
God.
So suddenly to be able to go and do all these things that we'd never been able to do before, there was a sense of horrible liberation and the guilt that came with it, but a sense that we could try these things. But actually the first year, it was so painful to go and do them. And we had to start saying no. And we said, please ask us again. We will be able to in due course, but we're not up to it yet. It was all too new. And I remember going for Sunday lunch with some friends and my son Cam hiding under the dining table for the whole time we were there, because he'd always ridden around on the back of Harry's power chair and he didn't know how to be anywhere without his brother. He just didn't know, and nor did we. So
should we lighten the mood very
us.
slightly? Should we lighten the mood very slightly and have a look into Phil Dave's childhood?
Oh,
Linda Dave, Phil's lovely mum. When the children were very young, we had a beautiful cat called Rainbow. When she died, Linda, the reason I like you, Linda, you're Machiavellian. When she died, I told the kids she'd gone to live in Sweden with our old au pair. They believed it for years. Phil, I got bad news. Your cat's dead.
Do you know, genuinely, it was years that we believe. I mean, thinking in hindsight now, it must have been ridiculous to think how old Rainbow would have been when I thought to myself, no, surely she can't still be in Sweden. She can't still be.
Yeah.
But I just remember coming downstairs one time, and I reckon this had to be in the mid-noughties, I reckon, something like that. Actually, no, it must have been late 90s, I beg your pardon. Coming down the stairs and overhearing my mother having a conversation with my father's then business partner, explaining the situation, saying, well, actually, we told the children that she went to go to Sweden, but actually she did die. And that's when I heard it for the first time. I thought, oh, okay, so she's and because obviously she didn't tell us, and she probably still wouldn't have told us to this day. For all I know, there'd be a 35-year-old cat wandering around Sweden still.
In Sweden, having a great time,
popping into
driving a Volvo,
popping into IKEA for some meatballs or something like that.
Sure, who wouldn't?
But the point is that I just believed it. But look, I understand why my mother did, and she actually did sort of put here as a further message. She said just wants to save them the pain. I put it now that it was delay the pain, but
how the hell is your mother going to tell you that you were adopted? I don't know how she's going to deal with that. That's going to be difficult.
Surely no one else would be mad enough to have this.
Well, you say that, but really, you are my love child. Anyway, so it's been really, it's very, very, very practical. It's what you're saying is so practical. I want to touch on one thing very quickly. The reverse is when you're saying that everyone's always around you, and Phil and I talk about this a lot, and it drives us both, makes us both very angry and hurt. A lot of people head for the hills. Somehow they feel that death is contagious, unless it's the black, plague. It's not. Cancer is contagious. It's not. And they can't deal with it. I got a letter 6 or 7 years later. I'm not going to say from whom. And it said, and I'd been on holiday with these people. We were close, right? And they just disappeared. There was a misunderstanding. So sorry, there was a misunderstanding in the letter. There was a misunderstanding. And I wrote back. I said, what part of somebody's dead are you not following? Goodbye. And then I had to go to a funeral. They were there. And this fellow came over all hale and hi, great to I turned my back on him and I walked away. I wasn't going to engage with that. I get it. They can't deal with it, but come on.
Yes, but
just be honest about it.
Pathetic. It's
exactly.
pathetic.
The difference is be honest. Be honest. Just don't say. Just say there's a misunderstanding. Mm-hmm. Well, no. The only I think it's understood perfectly. You went through one of the most shocking times of your life, Ross. Mm. Your friend wasn't there when you needed them. Mm. In fact, instead they decided to cower away. Mm. What have you misunderstood?
Yep, there's nothing to misunderstand. It's absolutely crystal clear. Did you find, Lizzie, that the people you wouldn't expect it was suddenly amazing because they were with me? People just were leaving food on the doorstep and they'd phone, and we were passing. I went, you weren't passing. You lived miles away. That's so kind of you. And I've never, ever forgotten their kindnesses. Never.
It's so extraordinary, isn't it? And it makes you then behave differently. It made me, as my children said, it makes you a better friend to people that go through it because you've had it demonstrated to you how those small acts of kindness make all the difference in the world, especially when some of the people you thought would be right there with you can't cope and they have headed to the hills, as you've said.
And you know what? It's little tiny thing. Please don't think, and I hope, Lizzie, you agree with me. If you don't, yell. But please don't think you've got to turn up with a 3-course meal or send flowers a point. I mean, just don't bother.
2 courses.
Pick up 2 courses is fine. 2 courses is fine and some single scotch. But just a phone call. Just a phone call.
And on that note,
nothing more.
Remind us the name of the book.
Oh, thank you. It's called When Grief Equals Love. It's being published by Unbound Publishing. And I would be so grateful if anybody, Unbound, they publish in the traditional way, but they crowdfund the costs of the book before they publish it and before the editor works. And if people want to go to unbound.com and search for When Grief Equals Love, you can pledge for your copy of the book and it will help it to get published. And I'm at 55% of funding after 2 weeks. And most of the books take 3 to 6 months to fund. So I'd be so grateful if we can get to 100% as quickly as possible, and then it'll be published.
If
with
you
Russ's
can send me,
interview too.
Lizzie, I don't say this with other things, but it's because it's so pertinent to everything that we try to do, and Phil and I try to do 3 times a week on the show and everything like that. If you send us some information, I'll get it put up on our website.
Thank you.
So at least people could see that, because it's an important thing and it's practical.
Well, I think the only reason you and I have done it, Russ, and shared our stories is because we want to help other people. That's the only point of this book.
I never want to talk.
Couldn't think of a stronger note to end on. Lizzie, thank you so much. I'm so sorry we are out of time, but thank you
for having me.
Do come back and speak to us again. We definitely want that. Can we just end on one of the most pertinent things I've read for a long time? Sue Sleet says, thanks for today's show. It's 9 years this week since my dad died, and the first time I've shared my feelings. I don't think we can get any better than that. Sue, thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Phil.
Thank you very much to you, Russell. Thank you to Lizzie. Thank you for getting your internet sorted at last. Thank you to Lizzie. Thank you to Lizzie Pickering. Really appreciate it. We'll see you, Friday, I suppose.
Friday.
Bye-bye.